is a very, very false idea. It's not really under control. Fact is, in the final stages of failure, we can't afford the increasing prices anymore. And it's this multiplication of artificial indebtedness which prevents us from doing so. So that isn't in our failure. What's happening the whole while is one of the most preposterous, hideous lies to us of all. And that is that we're benefited by not being able to afford higher prices by the costs of interest, which are perpetually escalating upon us by this perpetual multiplication of artificial indebtedness. So the lie is that he's serving you by taking away from you so much that you can't afford the higher prices, so industry can't charge them to you, and industry is expatriated or fails, and that's, of course, why we are losing our jobs and thereupon losing our homes, etc., etc., etc.
The money supply is not changing in any significant way. What we're doing is lowering interest rates by buying Treasury securities.
No. He is not lowering interest rates by buying securities. He lowers interest rates by lowering interest rates. Bernanke is the lower of rates if rates are lowered.
And by lowering interest rates, we hope to stimulate the economy to grow faster.
Actually, what he's saying then is that the parasite hopes the host recovers just enough that the parasite can suck the host dry or at a rate which approximates sucking the host just almost dry. As he says, if we recover a little bit more than this, they'll raise interest rates again and curtail the overheated growth of the so-called economy, the lie of economy, which of course can only impose terminal artificial indebtedness upon us.
So the trick is to find the appropriate moment when to begin to unwind this policy, and that's what we're going to do.
He's confirming what I just said then, as if it serves you. In other words, he's saying that the parasite is indeed going to nearly suck the host dry, if indeed the host recovers enough for the parasite to do so.
Is keeping inflation in check less of a priority for the Federal Reserve now?
No, absolutely not. What we're trying to do is achieve a balance.
A balance which can exist then, because if prices aren't increasing while we maintain a vital circulation, while we're accumulating ever greater sums of artificial debt, this imposes ever greater costs on industry and therefore erodes margins of solubility if industry cannot maintain or continue to increase its prices accordingly to maintain margins of solubility. Therefore, such a balance cannot exist under this lie that we call central banking or a purported economy.
We've been very, very clear that we will not allow inflation to rise above 2% or less.
In other words, again then, he's confirming this fact that should we begin to recover in any way which to any extent which might benefit us to the least degree in respect to this increasing sum of debt, that they will increase interest rates again to make it impossible for us to afford the increasing prices which industry must charge to maintain margins of solubility. Thus, we will lose our jobs, we will lose our homes to an ever greater degree because interest multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation or remaining capacity to service debt. So what he's telling you is ensuring terminal failure. And worse, he's proposing this benefits you, that you can't afford these increasing prices which industry must charge to maintain margins of solubility over this ever-increasing sum of falsified debt to the central banking system. He's saying that's to your benefit, when the only way that this is achieved is by such greater cost in the way of interest that you can't afford those higher prices. So what he's pretending to provide in one hand, he's taking away at least that much, if not more so, from the other.
Can you act quickly enough to prevent inflation from getting out of control?
We could raise interest rates in 15 minutes if we have to.
There you go. Exactly as I told you.
So there really is no problem with raising rates, tightening monetary policy, slowing the economy, reducing inflation.
No problem, that is, unless you're the cause of inflation, price inflation, that is, and terminal failure.
At the appropriate time. Now, that time is not now.
Then we can't possibly be in a recovery then, can we?
You have what degree of confidence in your ability to control this?
100%.
But he can't control this because interest inherently and irreversibly multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a vital circulation until we succumb to terminal failure. And of course, if he had been controlling this, it would never have happened, would it?
Do you anticipate a scenario in which you would commit to more than $600 billion?
Oh, it's certainly possible. And again, it depends on the efficacy of the program. It depends on inflation. And finally, it depends on how the economy looks.
Note most of all, then, that he hasn't told at one single juncture how it depends and how he can possibly overcome the very fact that his own obfuscation of the currency inherently and irreversibly multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a vital circulation until we succumb to a terminal sum of artificial indebtedness.
How would you rate the likelihood of dipping into recession again?
It doesn't seem likely that we'll have a double-dip recession, and that's because, among other things, some of the most cyclical parts of the economy, like housing, for example, are already very weak, and they can't get much weaker. And so another decline is relatively unlikely.
How utterly preposterous. If you can't maintain a vital circulation subject to interest without perpetually multiplying artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation or remaining capacity to service debt, how is it that you can solve the causes of the problems which are plaguing us? The very system that Ben Bernanke represents is the very cause of our problems. Unless we eradicate that system, unless we rectify its faults, we haven't a chance of escaping this thing, and we haven't a chance of ever establishing actual monetary rectitude, not a principle of which have these men even referred to once.
Now, that being said, I think a very high unemployment rate for a protracted period of time, which makes consumers, households less confident, more worried about the future, I think that's the primary source of risk that we might have another slowdown in the economy.
Notice the uncertainty in his voice as he tells this line. How is this a matter of confidence? Why should we have confidence in a process which can only engender terminal failure? Only the most stupid country in the world can have that confidence, and the fact that we all have confidence in a terminal process is not to our credit. The only way that we're going to solve our problems is not by having false confidence in what can't serve us. It's in identifying, and only and certainly identifying, absolute solution.
You seem to be saying that the recovery that we're experiencing now is not self-sustaining.
It may not be. It's very close to the border. It takes about 2.5% growth just to keep unemployment stable, and that's about what we're getting.
A moment ago, he had 100% confidence, and now he's confessing that this purported recovery, which all their data isn't even concurring exists, may not be sustainable.
We're not very far from the level where the economy is not self-sustaining.
Matter-of-factly, then, the purported economy, the live economy, his live economy, is not self-sustaining. It has a finite lifespan predicated by the rates of interest and tolerated growth, which are applied to it by people who no more than exploit us and provide nothing in return.
The debate on Capitol Hill this week is over whether to extend the Bush tax cuts, which would likely increase the budget deficit. Bernanke wouldn't answer that question directly, but he certainly made one thing clear. Cutting the budget deficit must be done, he said, but it shouldn't be done right now.
As we have said, the reason that taxes cannot be raised in relation to this ever-escalating sum of artificial indebtedness is we simply can't afford to service the debt because it's already beyond terminal extents. The only thing that's allowing us to survive this artificially for the while is not raising taxes in relation to this increasing sum of artificial indebtedness. But to advocate fiscal austerity is entirely impractical, implausible, and in fact, actual austerity is physically impossible in the fact that there is no way to resolve this artificial sum of falsified indebtedness, and in fact, even worse than what is recently being called austerity, is a preposterous further crime against us, because what it means is not only these purported legislators in Washington, but in every country of the world, all they're doing is attempting to saddle this impossible indebtedness upon their very own people, a debt which has never been justified, a debt which has been multiplied by interest, which in fact has never been justified, however we believe otherwise. And so everyone who's advocating purported austerity is actually alike concerted criminal against all of us. Even worse, I suppose, in regard to the sloppy, impertinent thinking of these two men, is this idea that they just expressed of cutting the budget deficit. There should never be a budget deficit, and there only is a budget deficit because of two things. That is the corruption of Congress and the United States government in general. And the other is this further idea that this lie of economy is justified. This purported central banking system is the very cause of our federal deficits. So neither can be resolved unless we eradicate the entire banking system and the obfuscation of the currency, which is responsible for all this. But a further offense of this idea that we only need to cut budget deficits is a total disregard for future generations. No generation whatsoever has any right to impose their debts on future generations, particularly when they are crippling, criminal, terminal debts, as we are now. Therefore, cutting the budget deficit isn't good enough. There should be no budget deficit whatever, because we know we have no right to impose our debts on posterity.
That we need to pay close attention to the fact that we are recovering now. We don't want to take actions this year that will affect this year's spending and this year's taxes in a way that will hurt the recovery. That's important.
Around and around and around in a circle of lies. In other words, we could not recover if indeed we were servicing this additional debt we're accumulating in a purported rescue.
But that doesn't stop us from thinking now about the long-term structural budget deficit. I mean, we're looking at 10, 15, 20 years from now, a situation where almost the entire federal budget will be spent on Medicare, Medicaid,